Live from Chattanooga, Tennessee, it's Nooganomics with David Tulis.
We are hearing from the hand of Robert Lattin of the Brookings Institution and Ian Hathaway from Inside Economics about the obstacles to running a small business, to starting a small business. And they find that in the census data they looked at last year, that around the country, in many cities, in virtually all the cities, there is a long-term decline in what they call business dynamism. And that is to say the movement of businesses opening and closing, of people moving from one job to another, of people changing careers, trading careers. Business dynamism, they say, is inherently disruptive, but it is also critical to long-run economic growth. Research has established, they say, that this process of creative destruction is essential to productivity gains, by which more productive outfits drive out the less productive ones, and new entrants disrupt incumbents, and workers are better matched with firms. So overall, if you have a free market, you have people who are better pleased in their work, and they're more productive, more valuable to the marketplace, meaning they're more valuable to other people. Now, that being said, we are here in Chattanooga. My name is David Tulis, and we're talking with Eric Pelton, the accountant, a CPA, and we want to see how, even though that may be true more or less here in Chattanooga, that there are some basic things that you, my listener, might want to consider if you're going to go into business. Now, I've suggested to you before that if you're thinking of starting a business, whether a franchise or something that comes out of your own genius, that you call Eric Pelton and meet with him and ask about what you should be doing in the early stages. Not that you need an accountant or a tax preparer right off, but you want to have someone in mind as you develop your operation, and then start having to have a heavy slog through the numbers. And that's what Eric does. He's glad to meet with you, my listener, and hear your business plan. He might be able to give you some tips. We can maybe hear what he has to say about some basic tips for you, my listener, if you are thinking of starting a business. Well, Eric, welcome to our show.
Good morning.
Well, so my listener wants to know, okay, what does Eric Pelton have to say about numbers? You're the numbers guy here in Chattanooga. What are some things that are useful to know, particularly now that we have the end of the year? You prepare tax returns. What are some things, looking first at the idea of taxes? What are some tax things that are of note at the next to the last month of the year?
Well, there's several year-end tax strategies a business can look into, and we'll talk about those. But referring back to your mention of this article about national dynamism, the American economy is actually in a constant state of churn, and historically, one new business is born every minute in the United States, while another one fails every 80 seconds. And so sometimes the conversation is, why do those fail, and why would you want to go in business? But it's still a great time to go into business, and there's great tax benefits for owning your own business. And there are several reasons why people start a business. Sometimes it might be because they were laid off from their job, and other times it may be because it's always been a dream of theirs just to be their own boss and try to steer their own course. Tax-wise, person starts a business, there's enormous tax benefits. Also, there's enormous tax responsibilities when a person starts a business. But to answer your question, going back to what does a person do coming down to the final stages of the year, they look at their investments if they have some and want to decide whether they're going to take some gains or losses. That happens to folks in the last 2 months of the year. Some people bundle their expenses, their itemized deductions, meaning they barely have enough to itemize. So every other year, they will pay 2 years worth of property taxes, pay them in January, pay them again in December. So that year they can run their itemized deductions up. They also accelerate their charitable giving, and then they also determine what else they can do on the off year to generate additional income. So
So itemizing, say something about that. Is there a general rule as to who should itemize or whom should take the general deduction?
The standard deduction keeps increasing each year, and just this morning the IRS released the new information for the standard deduction. The exemption does go up $100 per person, but the standard deduction stays the same. $12,000 threshold is a large number for those that have a small mortgage on their home. So the driving factor might be whether they have job expenses, a lot of medical expenses, or high property and high mortgage interest to deduct.
Those are all deductible, right?
Correct.
More interest payments on your house are deductible. So if you have those expenses, you want to add them up and try to match or pass the standard deduction. So you have to kind of rough that in pencil, all these expenses.
That's correct. And those that get close, sometimes they can take that information to their tax advisor and they can come up with some things that they may not have thought of that can actually tip it over the top, and they get to itemize.
So if they itemize, they may save a few dollars in taxes, but they could save hundreds if they find a real juicy one.
That's true. Typically, the one that person forgets about is, during the year, they may have bought a new or used car, and they get the standard sales tax rate based on a flow chart of what their adjusted income, but a large ticket item, they can also add that to their their sales tax deduction.
How are sales tax deductions figured in itemized accounts? Do you have to keep all your receipts showing sales tax you paid? Do we get that in Tennessee?
We can get those receipts, and it can happen. There's people that do that. And if they were to save their tickets for an entire year, they may exceed what they're given based on a flow chart by $200 or $300, and that $200 or $300 might save them $30 to $50 on their taxes. And for most listeners, they're going to say, for saving the tickets and it saved me $30, I'd rather just use the standard based on my income and let me take my deduction that way.
And not worry about itemizing. Do most people take the standard, Eric Pelton, the standard deduction?
It's half and half from my experience.
We have a call. This is David Tulis. And caller, this is David Tulis. You're on the line. What's on your mind?
Yeah, in that the Supreme Court ruled income to be defined as profit and gain on frivolous activity and not property, and wages are property. Question regarding Title 26. And I don't have it in front of me, but I did read it some time ago, whereas everything a business does to earn profit and gain is tax deductible. What is your take on that? I believe it is in Title 26. I don't have it at my fingertips, but is everything that a business does to earn profit and gain deductible? I'll listen on the air. Thanks.
Actually, any business that operates trying to earn a profit, those expenses that are necessary and ordinary, they are deductible for that business.
And is there some conflict over what necessary and ordinary is?
Proving necessary and ordinary, for some businesses, it's necessary for that business owner to drive a rather high-end expensive car. But for most businesses, it may not be necessary and ordinary in that line of work to display wealth, but rather just drive a modest car because they're out promoting other economies.
And so if that taxpayer has as a necessary and ordinary expense a fancy car that the auditor says is not necessary, he would not get that deduction based on that subjective view of the auditor.
But he could argue to the auditor and tell the auditor that, in my line of work, I have to prove that I'm successful. So therefore, for me, a $12,000 car isn't going to work. I need to have a $35,000 car. And then they would move on with.
And that's a business expense that's not taxed against. He can count that as an expense,
deduction,
and not pay a tax on it. Well, I have a question, Eric Pelton. We're talking with Eric Pelton, who runs E.J. Pelton Company with branches in Brainerd on Brainerd Road, right near the Bilo, and also in Saudi Daisy, just north of the Food City, the new Food City in Saudi Daisy. And the question is this, Eric: if let's say there's a woman who's been invited to be a tutor. Okay, she's been invited to be a tutor, and should she accept payment for her services in cash or check as a person, or should she form a corporation, which would then let her take as deductions all the expenses related to her going across town, let's say, to do tutoring services to this fine family? What are the advantages of doing that kind of work, let's say, as a corporation as opposed to an individual?
Well, if she was going to engage herself in some tutoring, it would be best if she kept it simple, did not incorporate, but the fact that she's receiving that money in her name, she is a business owner. And so her commuting to from her job, not her home, from her job over to the tutoring, that is a tax deduction. Now, if she goes from her job, goes home first, and then goes to the tutoring, then she's commuting, and then she's commuting again. But she gets to deduct all the expenses and maintain other records depending on her research and her magazines and textbooks that she needs to do.
Her educational material. So that would include, let's say, a trip to London, where she went to an art museum because among the things she talks about with her student is art. So she could deduct that. She could deduct purchases of sample products that are educational in nature, videos that are educationally related, travels to museums, travels to nature walks and things like that. Those are all expenses, and you're saying she can take those expenses as deductions, even though she's not a corporation.
She doesn't need to be a corporation. However, if she has one student and her revenues were $180 for the year, I don't think a trip to London will quite justify, the expense matching up to the revenue.
I understand. So incorporation is not something that is necessary for her. She can take all of her expenses as a tutor. She can take them. She can have money coming in. It would be filed on her personal tax return, and all expenses, including trips, visits to museums, books, and whatnot, connected with her education as the teacher and her student's education as the client, are deductions.
That is correct.
Or expenses that she through which she can reduce her tax profile.
That is correct.
And now you serve entrepreneurs like that in your business?
Yes, we do. And in fact, if we were at the beginning stages of this person that was starting this type of business, we would also ask if they have a complete separate place in their home that they use exclusively for business, not half personal and half business, but exclusive. And many will have an office, and that office is a room that's 10 by 10 or half of a room. And we take that square footage and start applying the business use of office in the home and pick up an additional tax deduction there.
What are some fine points of knowledge regarding taxes, Eric, that you might want to pass along to my listener? What are some thumbnail points, a little sketch, if you will, of advice that you would offer to my listener who's entrepreneurially inclined, or actually right now running a small business?
Well, getting a new business venture off to a good start, the first step is determining what type of structure. You were mentioning the corporation or an LLC or a sole proprietorship. The reason a person may become a corporation or an LLC is because they're looking for the legal protection in the event that there's a suit against the owner. Now, a tutor that's teaching some art or teaching some music lessons, the exposure for a lawsuit there, it would be quite minimal, as opposed to somebody who's running a tanning salon or a person that's fixing brakes and sending a family down the road and then the brakes fail. So in the beginning stages, a business owner is constantly evaluating, I'm a sole proprietor, but should I switch to a corporation? And that's a constant study as a business moves forward and develops their business. But after they decide what type of business, then they have to zero in on the tax deductions that they're going to get. And, many businesses have a lot of startup expenses, and a number one deduction for somebody starting a business that they typically overlook is the fact that before they started in business, they've got things that they've owned before they ever started. Those items are a desk, a computer, other textbooks. If it's a mechanic, he's got a set of tools. And these things they bought and paid the tax on the money and bought these items, and now they're taking them out of personal use and they're rolling them into business use, and those items can be set up and start the beginning depreciation.
How do you do that? In a nutshell, what is depreciation, and how do you start taking familiar personal items, bringing them into a business use, and then beginning this process? I don't quite get that.
Well, you make a list. You list what the items are. Years ago, I had a mechanic that he had been working at a dealership, and he had bought his tools a little bit at a time, built up a toolbox that was well over $30,000. So he listed out his tools. He even took a video camera and laid them out and videoed them. We took that $30,000, we wrote it in a journal, and we posted it to the depreciation schedule and started taking depreciation according to the laws at the time.
And what is the effect of doing that?
Well, in this case, the $30,000 worth of tools generated about a $7,000 deduction each year while it worked its way through. So someone starting a business and they started using their computer, and they've got some other office equipment and a desk. This could generate an $800 to a $1,200 deduction, depending on.
So the mechanic with the tools, the tools were worth $30,000, and you arranged that he took a depreciation worth $7,000 each year. So in other words, he was sort of he was reducing his tax hit by $7,000 for about 4 years. Is that right?
We did 5 years
to cover the $30,000, $7,000 a year.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
What other points does my listener need to consider?
When somebody starts a business, they are, depending on the type of business, some things that they normally did, what was normal part of their lifestyle, then becomes a business deduction if they've arranged their affairs. And the Supreme Court Justice years ago said, there's nothing sinister about a person arranging their affairs to keep their taxes to a minimum. So if a person is driving to and from a certain point and they stop halfway and start a business transaction, then the rest of their travel would become a deductible mileage.
But not the first half.
Right.
Well, what if let's say my listener's in business, and let's say he has business and he does some selling for his business. He's always looking for new places to go. So he could say theoretically, every time I drive my car, I'm really always looking for sales, and I'm often greeting people, and I'm continually seeking the prosperity of my business. I think that's what the caller was bringing up. Anything you do connected with your business is theoretically against your tax liability. Is that what you're saying in this case? Though, if a man is always doing business, even going to church, I mean, when he goes to church, he prays for his prosperity. Could he not deduct going to church as a business expense?
When you back out of your driveway, you're on personal driving. And when you get to your first stop, suppose you're an insurance agent and you drive 1 mile down the road and stop at a convenience store, and you're engaging work, you're officially at work. From the home to your first stop. Most people, they leave their home and they drive all the way to the office first. That is commuting. Everybody commutes. There's no tax deduction. There's a person that's in the heat and air business. He backs out of his driveway. If he has an office he's going to or a workshop he's going to, then he is in the commuting mode. He can say, well, I'm driving down the road and I'm looking to the left and I'm looking to the right, but you're just looking at houses. I don't think you're officially engaged in work yet. So there is some commuting there. Now, if his business is out of his home, the heat and air man, he's put his vehicle in reverse, he's 100%. Or if the heat and air man has his van loaded down with tools and equipment, he is 100% because that vehicle is not being used personally.
So a home-based business really has an advantage in this sense. There's no commute.
Correct.
And we're urging you, my listener, to think about having your own home-based business. As Eric Pelton, the accountant and CPA, is telling us, all of your travel that has any connection with your trade is deductible. Is something that you want to keep a record of, right? The listener should keep a record of all of his travels that touch on business when he's out and about.
That is correct. And several business owners will keep track of their business travel and not keep track of their personal travel. Walk in and say, here's my business. I've got 12,000 miles. Well, the IRS wants to know also how much more miles that was personal that you had. And they say, well, that's my business miles. Well, we want to list the personal miles also, even though they're not deductible.
So should my listener, if he keeps records of that kind, keep personal miles and business miles in the same record?
Correct.
Should he have a little notebook for that, or how should he keep track?
Oh, there's several ways, and they've got apps that are developed that can really make things much, much easier. But I've had several business owners that had to reconstruct their mileage based on their sales tickets, or a realtor based on closings and based on listings. So, a business owner that has all their sales records had a roofer, and he had a notebook of every estimate he made. So that had the address and the estimate he made, and he had to sit down after the fact and work it all up. We didn't say it was a contemporaneous log, but it was a reconstruction, and a reconstruction based on facts is allowed.
Does that contemporaneous record have to have on mileage? Does it have to have with whom the taxpayer spoke and dealt with, or does it just have to have the mileage per day? How detailed does it have to be?
It just has to have the mileage and where they went to, and it could be, in this roofer's case, the address and not the who. The extra details when you get into meals, then they want to know who, what, when, where, why, and what you were discussing.
Right. Well, Eric, what else do you have to mention in the way of a tip sheet for my listener? If he's a taxpayer, what tips are helpful to him?
Well, a quick checklist if you're starting your business would be to have a business plan. And second would be to know whether your business is going to require special licensing, and then know how to compute your startup costs for your business, and don't underestimate your startup costs. Quite possibly find a mentor, put together a marketing plan, and learn about some of your business competitors. Don't underestimate your competitors. And then have a customer service strategy in mind, and then also, most importantly, have a marketing strategy on a way you can get the word out on your business.
Any thoughts on capitalization?
Well, many new businesses underestimate the amount of capital it's going to take to launch, and they underestimate having enough cash reserve to fund those first 3 or 4 months that have enormous red ink and losses.
Use credit card, yes or no?
If it's necessary.
This is David Tulis. We're talking with Eric Pelton. So, Eric, I do thank you for joining me here and my listener at AM 1240 Hot News Talk Radio.
Thank you.
This is David Tulis. I want to make sure that you go to Delia's Authentic Mexican Restaurant today for lunch or dinner. She is open every day except the Lord's Day, and she has authentic Mexican food in South Saudi Daisy. Call ahead if you like, 521-7145. That's 521-7145. Free iced tea if you mention the radio station. We're also brought to you by Cell Surgeon, right next to the Old Chicago's Pizza at Northgate. And the number there is 668-100. That's 668-0100. David Tulis, I do thank you for giving me just a couple of minutes of your time. I look forward to talking with you tomorrow.